there's been so much going on.
It's great to see you too.
Volatility in the markets. It's nice to be talking with you guys again. Up and down we went today as well, but I think many would say it's interesting to see at least some green across the screen and some movement to the upside considering all of the volatility we've had over the last week and a half or so.
Well, that said, we are still seeing a little bit of a downturn as we do get closer to the close. The S&P 500 was up as much as 1.8%. It did fall as much as 0.1%. Higher right now by just about 0.8%.
Having said all that, things feel relatively calm, muted, normal compared to the last week and a half. The S&P has gained only 3 times since the April 2nd tariffs were announced, and today's advance is actually the smallest of those 3 gains.
Getting a boost, though, today from, of course, some of those big heavyweights like Apple up about 2%. That's your biggest point contributor here to the S&P 500. Some of the healthcare names like Lilly also doing their work. But then you had that drag from Meta, from Amazon, Broadcom, NVIDIA. In fact, a lot of the folks in the chip space really getting dinged, of course, after additional tariff headlines now saying that maybe chip tariffs are coming, which I don't know.
At some point.
I thought they were coming and they weren't, and maybe now they are. I can't keep up with anything here. What I can keep up with here are the closing numbers on the screen. You can put today's numbers in the book as you get the bells and the clapping and cheering that go along with it. A Dow Jones Industrial average higher by more than 300 points, or about 0.8%. The S&P 500 looks like it's going to gain a similar amount on a percentage basis, roughly about 43 points, closing right above that 5,400 level. The NASDAQ composite higher by more than 100 points, or 0.6%. But your gainers on today, you're going to find that your outperformers, on the day are going to be in that cyclical space. The Russell 2000 up 1.1%, S&P midcaps up 1.2%, and Dow Transports clocking in at about 1.2% higher.
All right, back to the S&P 500 we go. And Romaine, of course, breaking down all of those closing numbers. But you got about 432 names actually in the S&P 500. Scarlett gaining some ground today, 70 to the downside.
All right, let's take a look at the IMAP, which shows the sector performances. And remember, on Friday, this was all green. Today, there's a slice of red, and it's in consumer discretionary. And just taking a look at some of the names, companies that certainly do rely on importing from, say, China, are among the decliners there. So which makes sense given everything we've heard about the tariffs.
All right, a lot of green. I had a lot to choose from. I want to go to, speaking of tariffs, we did see GM and Ford as well rallying in today's session. GM up about 3.5%, Ford a gain of about 4%. This is after you did have the president come out and said he was looking at helping car companies with tariffs. So a whole boost to the group. Stellantis also seeing some gains. Romaine mentioned and singled out Apple. This one at its highs today, guys, up about 7.5%, finishing the day, though, with only a gain of about 2.2%, but nonetheless to the upside. Again, we go back to the bigger, broader macro story of tariffs. President Trump's administration, of course, temporarily exempting phones, computers, and chips from its so-called reciprocal tariffs. So at least for now, they are spared, and that company's global supply chain spared, as well as we know so much exposure to Apple when it comes to China. Let's all go to Intel. Romaine, you mentioned the stocks, and overall it was just a little bit higher as an index today, but you did have Intel up almost 3% in today's session. The company entering into a definitive agreement to sell 51% of its Altera business to Silver Lake at an $8.75 billion valuation. So again, Intel continuing to kind of remake its future, and so selling that off. And then I got to mention Fannie and Freddie. Fannie up just shy of about 9%, but was up as much as 14% earlier in the session.
What was the big news that they were tweeting us?
I don't understand that this is the news that gets it going.
Yeah.
Initially,
Pulte
there was
came out.
Right. Initially, there was a tweet. The Federal Housing Finance Agency Director William Pulte said in a post on X that news on Fannie Mae is coming shortly. We did get some news that Omid Malik, co-founder of 1789 Capital, joining the board of mortgage giant Fannie Mae.
Was that the big news?
I don't know. But keep in mind that company is the investment firm where Donald Trump Jr. works.
Yeah, so no conflicts of interest. I am curious, though.
Clean as
when
can
you
be.
say big news on Fannie Freddie, obviously everyone's waiting for the actual big news, which
Correct.
is, what happens with this conservatorship and whether it's unending and whether we take these companies back into the hands of real investors here. Did he not touch on that at all?
I didn't say anything like that, and it seems like they're still waiting. So maybe that's why we're off its highs. But yeah, it's like everybody's kind of on pins and needles. So we're still waiting. TBD. All right, over to you, Tim.
Okay, let's start with some of the prominent decliners that we saw in today's session. Romaine mentioned Meta Platforms dragging down the indices, falling by 2.2%. I'm keeping an eye on them after the FTC's antitrust trial got underway today. The FTC is seeking to break up Meta platforms, and we actually saw Mark Zuckerberg take the stand earlier. The FTC is seeking to force Meta to divest Instagram and WhatsApp. It alleges that the acquisitions gave Meta this illegal monopoly on portions of the social networking industry. The trial is expected to last a couple of months. It's going to also feature testimony from former Meta executive Sheryl Sandberg. And I'm also watching shares of what happened with LVMH today. Here in the U.S., ADRs of LVMH fell by 6.4%. This after the company reported that sales of the company fell more than expected in the first quarter. This was due to weak demand for luxury goods in China and in the U.S., and there's a threat of a trade war, of course. The company's fashion and leather goods division, which is its largest unit, saw a 5% decline in revenue on an organic basis. Analysts were expecting only a decline of just about half a percentage point to 0.6 of a percentage point. LVMH is considering price increases to offset the impact of tariffs.
Price increases?
They've got room to adjust marketing costs. Wow. They don't plan to radically change U.S. production. They've got 75 brands. They don't call them brands. They're maisons.
Really? That's what they call them?
Yeah. 6 sectors.
AKA brands.
Fendi, Louis Vuitton, Tiffany, Sephora. This is like Romaine's world.
They're
he's the luxury goods guy.
Oh,
they're houses.
You.
So yeah, that's French, Carol, for
houses.
Yeah.
Way, so. About 75 houses in 6
like
different
Is
sectors.
that like Hors d'oeuvres?
Okay.
Miss
right.
Escargot.
Okay, I like that.
The costliest dinner I ever treated someone to.
Finally, I do want to look at shares of DaVita. This is the kidney dialysis company. It fell 3% today. Fell more earlier in the session. It did become aware of a ransomware incident that has encrypted certain elements of its network. The full scope, nature, and potential impact on the company are not yet known at this point. Shares falling today by just about 3%.
All right, let's take a quick look at yields because we did see a lot of activity there. You see on the short end of the curve there, that was where most of the activity was. Down 11 basis points on your 2-year yield, 15 on that 5-year yield. And you did also see buying going on in the longer end of the curve, drops of about 10 basis points, on the 10-year, and then another 5 to 6 basis points on the 30-year yield. But again, really doesn't underscore the volatility that we saw in between here. Volatility, of course, that was also whipsawed around by some of those reports that we got out around 11 a.m. with that New York Fed survey showing inflation expectations amongst U.S. households continuing to creep higher as their outlook, Carol Massar, for their own economic conditions continue to drift lower.
Like, kind of interesting to see at least, that trade in the Treasury trade. But I got to say, I feel like we just kind of wait for the next shoe to drop. And, whether or not we're going to see something new, additional, lasting when it comes to tariffs. And I think it's a really difficult market environment to work within. I'm curious to see what the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, has to say definitively. But can we even assume that we will have anything definitive when it comes to tariff strategy here?
I don't know the answer to that, but what I do know is that it seems like every day we get more news. I mean, how many of us woke up on Saturday morning thinking that smartphones and laptops were exempt coming from China to these 145% tariffs? And then we learned yesterday that, okay, there are going to be these sectoral tariffs for semiconductors, and these devices will actually fall under that category. So there is this sort of temporary reprieve for some of these large companies, including Apple. But it doesn't seem like this is the type of company that's going to escape unscathed.
Yeah, Carol, you mentioned definitive. It's definitive until someone else says something else, which is why people keep going to stores and loading up and buying what they can right now because they have no idea what could change in the next day or so. And a reminder that President Trump did hint that there was a possibility he would announce tariffs on semiconductors perhaps today. And, so far,
but what about
we haven't heard anything.
Autos and auto parts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's the other thing. So then maybe this little hint earlier today that there would be exemptions for auto parts. But again, a new bit of news.
Yeah, but the question is, when do you get sort of some stability in these announcements? Because again, it's not really what the policy is. It's the question is that policy going to change in a few months? You're not going to get any company to make the type of investments that I think the administration wants to see unless they have some clarity that if they do this, they're not going to have the rug pulled out from them in a matter of days, in some cases, or months.
Yeah, how do you game this out, especially if it means investing or making investments or hiring people or what have you? I kind of keep going back to that. It's a tough environment. All right, folks, that's a wrap. Our Monday almost over. Our cross-platform coverage on radio, TV, YouTube, Bloomberg Originals. We call it the closing bell. We will see you again, same time, same place tomorrow.